João grew up surrounded by the smell of fresh bread and the warmth of the oven. The bakery, a family inheritance, was more than just a business. It was a part of his soul. Every corner of the small establishment, with its aged wooden shelves and the counter that creaked when touched, told a story. His grandfather had started it with a simple dream: to bring joy to people through the aroma and taste of bread made with care. João always carried this legacy with pride. However, times had changed. The neighborhood, once full of families and children running through the streets, was now taken over by towering buildings and giant supermarkets selling everything cheaper and faster. Neighborhood bakeries like João's were being forgotten. No matter how hard he tried, the doors opened less and less for customers. He experimented with new recipes, changed the shop's decor, ran promotions, but nothing seemed to work. The flow of people continued to dwindle, and with it, his hope. Every morning, João arrived before the sun rose. He prepared the dough as he always did, with the same precision and dedication, but the feeling of emptiness kept growing. He looked out the bakery window and saw the movement on the streets, people rushing by, cars coming and going, but no one stopped to appreciate the simple pleasure of fresh bread, as they once did. The days became repetitive and discouraging. João spent hours at the counter, hands crossed, watching the shelves filled with bread that often ended up in the trash. The silence of the bakery echoed in his mind, and he started to wonder if he was fighting for a dream that no longer had a place in the modern world. One day, while washing his hands, he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror of the small bathroom at the back of the store. The deep bags under his eyes, the exhaustion etched on his face, and the frustration he tried to hide began to weigh on him more than ever. He knew he couldn't go on like this, but at the same time, he couldn't imagine his life without the bakery. It was all he knew, all he loved. Giving up would feel like erasing a part of himself. Despite all the love he had for the place, João knew the bills kept coming. Each month, the balance grew tighter. He had already sold some equipment, let go of his last remaining employee, and reduced the bakery's operating days. Nothing seemed to be enough. The harsh reality was relentless, and he began to wonder how much longer he could keep hold of something that, to him, felt like it was slipping through his fingers. That morning, the sound of the alarm clock was harsher than usual. João took longer to get up, feeling the weight of accumulated frustration. Despite all his dedication and effort, the bakery's business had become nearly non-existent. The bills kept piling up, and the uncertainty about the future loomed over him like a dark cloud. He dragged himself to the bakery, and upon opening the doors, couldn't help but notice how empty the space felt, almost lifeless. For hours, João stood behind the counter in silence, watching the busy street through the window. He saw people rushing by, some casting quick glances toward the inside of the bakery, but no one stopped. The bell on the door, which used to ring every half hour with the arrival of a customer, was silent. That day, it seemed as though the city had completely forgotten the existence of his bakery. At that moment, something inside João began to crumble. He felt like he was losing the battle, and the weight of that realization left him almost breathless. As much as he loved the bakery, he had reached a point where continuing seemed like stubbornness without sense. He thought about his grandfather, the effort that man had put into that place, and felt as though he was betraying his memory by even considering giving up. But reality could no longer be ignored. As he reflected on all of this, the phone rang. It was a supplier calling about an old debt, just another voice in the chorus of responsibilities he could no longer manage. He hung up the phone, sat down in one of the empty chairs, and put his hands on his head. No matter how hard he tried, he could no longer see a way out. His soul was tired, and his shoulders heavy with the burden of keeping something alive that seemed already dead. João closed the bakery earlier than usual that day. He locked the doors with a bitter feeling in his chest, a lump in his throat. He needed air, needed to think, maybe even step away for a while. The city streets were colder than usual, and the noise of passing cars filled the emptiness he felt inside. He wandered aimlessly for hours, trying to find clarity amidst the chaos of his thoughts. It was then, as João turned a corner, that he noticed a scene that stopped him in his tracks. Under an awning, sheltered from the cold wind, were a woman and her 2 children. They huddled together in old, worn-out blankets, and the woman held her children close, trying to shield them from the cold and the harshness of the streets. The sight hit him like a punch in the stomach. What he had been feeling suddenly seemed small in comparison to their reality. For a moment, João felt ashamed of his own problems. He had a home to return to, a place where he could stay warm. But what did that woman have? Their eyes met, and he saw something unexpected: strength, despite the hardship. She looked back at him with a mixture of exhaustion and hope, as if, even in that situation, there was still something worth fighting for. In that instant, an idea began to take shape in his mind. Perhaps he couldn't save the bakery in the way he had imagined. Perhaps he would have to let it go. But what if, instead of giving up entirely, he could help someone with the little he still had? João stood there for a few seconds, watching the woman and her children. Something in her gaze, tired, yet still full of life, touched him deeply. He slowly approached, unsure of what he was going to say. When he got close, the woman looked at him with an expression of curiosity and caution. Her 2 boys, small and wrapped in blankets that barely seemed to keep them warm, huddled beside her. "Are you okay?" João asked, not really knowing how to start the conversation. He realized it was a meaningless question for someone living on the streets, but he couldn't think of anything else to say. The woman nodded, but her deep, tired eyes told a different story. "We're trying to hold on," she whispered, as if anything more than a murmur would be too much for her energy. João felt a tightness in his chest. He was about to close his bakery, to give up on everything he had built, and here was someone who would likely give anything to have even half the problems he did. He knew nothing about this woman, but he felt an instant connection, a silent understanding that both of them were fighting their battles. Yet while he was on the verge of giving up, it seemed she didn't have that option. "Do you need help?" João asked, trying to find a way to act. He knew that a simple gesture of charity wouldn't be enough to change her life, but he couldn't ignore the urge to do something. The woman hesitated, as if trying to decide whether she could trust him. "We're looking for a way forward," she said, choosing her words carefully. "But for now, we just have to hold on here." João took a deep breath, and then, almost without thinking, the words came out. "I have a bakery. It's not doing very well, to be honest. I'm even thinking about closing the doors for a while. But if you need a place to stay or work, I can offer that. I don't know how long it will last, but it's better than staying out here." The woman looked at him with surprise. There was a mix of distrust and hope in her eyes. "Are you serious?" she asked, as if the offer was too good to be true. "Yes," João replied. "I need some time to think, to figure out what I'm going to do with the bakery. But in the meantime, it's empty. If you want to sell the bread that's already there, or even try baking your own, you can use the place. I won't charge anything. I just want you and your kids to have a better place than this." The woman remained silent, processing what she had just heard. She looked at her children, huddled by her side, and then back at João. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything now," João said quickly. "Just think about the offer. I'll leave the keys with you. You can open up tomorrow morning, and if you need anything, let me know." She stared at him for a few more seconds, as if trying to read his soul, and then finally nodded. "Thank you. I have no words." João handed her the keys to the bakery and walked away, feeling strangely light, as if by offering something to her, he had lifted part of the burden he had been carrying. As he walked back home, he wondered if this could really work. But in that moment, all he wanted was to give that woman and her children a chance to start over. The next morning, Maria, the woman's name, arrived at the bakery with her 2 children. Still holding the keys in her hand, she hesitated for a moment in front of the door. João's offer felt unreal. She had never imagined that a stranger would give her such an opportunity, especially in such a difficult time. Taking a deep breath, she looked at her children and smiled. This was her chance to give them a better life, and she couldn't waste it. As she opened the door, the familiar smell of fresh bread was already in the air. João had left the bakery just as it was. The shelves were still filled with the previous day's bread, and there were enough ingredients for Maria to get started. She didn't have much, but she carried something precious with her, her grandmother's special recipe. It was a recipe that had been passed down through generations, and even in the hardest moments of her life, she remembered how her grandmother's bread brought comfort to her family. "Everything's going to be okay," Maria said to herself, full of determination. She decided she would make that bread. She knew she didn't have much time since the money João had left in the register was only enough to buy a few more ingredients. But she was determined to make the most of what she had. Her children, excited to help, began organizing the shelves and cleaning the counter. Maria took out the old notebook with her grandmother's recipe, its pages yellowed with time, and started gathering the ingredients. It was a simple recipe, but the secret lay in how the dough was prepared, the exact resting time, and the love with which each loaf was shaped. As she worked, something inside Maria began to change. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was in control of her life. The bakery's oven, which once seemed like just another obstacle, now felt like an ally. The soft dough in her hands came to life as she molded it, and the smell that began to fill the room brought back memories of her childhood when she helped her grandmother in the kitchen. When the bread came out of the oven, golden with a crispy crust, Maria looked at it with pride. It was a beginning. She didn't know if she could sell it all, but she was willing to try. Her children helped place the bread on the shelves, and with a mix of nervousness and hope, Maria opened the bakery's doors to the world. In the beginning, the hours passed slowly. Few people came in, but those who did noticed something different. The smell of fresh bread was stronger, and the homemade, authentic taste made the first customers leave satisfied. Maria was nervous, but she always smiled while serving, remembering what João had said. This was her chance. As the day progressed, more people began to stop by, drawn by word of mouth and the aroma that spread through the street. The neighborhood, curious about the change in the bakery that had seemed forgotten for so long, started to return. Maria worked tirelessly, but with each loaf sold, she felt closer to giving her children a better life. And that same day, something special happened. An elderly woman around 70 years old entered the bakery and asked for one of the grandmother's loaves. After taking her first bite, her eyes lit up. "This bread, it reminds me of the bread my mother used to make when I was a child." The woman left emotional, and in that moment, Maria knew she was on the right path. In the following days, the bakery began to come to life in ways Maria had never imagined. Her grandmother's recipe, with its simplicity and authenticity, started to attract more customers every morning. The smell of freshly baked bread from João's oven seemed to call out to people, as if the aroma carried with it dormant memories, warming the hearts of everyone who passed by. Maria and her children worked hard, but the reward was evident. With each loaf sold, her confidence grew a little more. The money, which initially seemed insufficient to keep the bakery running, now began to multiply in the register. She bought more ingredients, baked more bread, and the shelves, once empty and forgotten, now shone with the fruits of her labor. The customers, impressed by the quality and taste of the bread, began returning regularly, and word of mouth spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some even offered to help Maria, saying they wanted to contribute to keeping such a special bakery open. "It's hard to find bread like this nowadays," they would say, touched by the flavor that brought back memories of simpler times. Maria, however, remained humble. She knew that success was fragile, and there was still much work ahead. But for the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful. Her children, once used to a life of uncertainty,
began to change as well. They were happier, excited to help, and even started dreaming of a better future. For Maria, seeing the smiles on their faces was the greatest reward of all.
What surprised Maria the most was how much she herself had changed. Not long ago, she had felt lost, without direction, but now she finally felt in control of her life. And all of this was thanks to João's generosity. Without knowing it, he had given her not just an opportunity, but a new reason to believe in herself. One morning, as Maria prepared the dough for another batch of bread, something unexpected happened. A small group of people, whom she had never seen before, entered the bakery. They were clearly tourists, and one of the women in the group, after tasting a loaf, was delighted. "I'm traveling across the country and I've never tasted anything this authentic," she said. "You should expand your business. Bread like this should be known everywhere." Maria smiled, grateful for the compliment, but the idea lingered in her mind. Expand the business. She could barely believe she was staying afloat with her small bakery. The thought of something bigger seemed like a distant dream, but at the same time, it planted a seed of possibility. The days went on, and the bakery was no longer a forgotten corner shop. People now eagerly waited for the fresh batches, and Maria began experimenting with new flavors, adding personal touches to her grandmother's recipe. Slowly, the small bakery was becoming a community landmark. However, Maria couldn't stop thinking about what João, the original owner, would say when he returned. Would he approve of the changes? Meanwhile, João was far away, taking the time he needed to reflect on his life and his bakery. He had no idea about the success brewing under Maria's care. With each passing day, the feeling that he should return grew stronger. What would he find when he decided to come back? Maria wondered, preparing herself for the inevitable reunion. João had been away from the bakery for a few weeks. During that time, he wandered the streets, visited distant relatives and friends, trying to find answers to what he should do with his life and his business. He had loved that bakery for as long as he could remember, but the burden of watching it slowly decline made him question his purpose. He was exhausted and needed a break. The offer he had made to the woman and her children felt like a temporary solution for both of them. What he didn't expect, however, was the growing restlessness. Although he had taken time to think, the thought of the bakery never left him. Something within him kept pulling him back, as if a part of his soul was anchored to that place. The decision to hand the keys to Maria had been impulsive, but now he wondered if she had truly managed to make a difference. He was curious, and perhaps even afraid, of what he would find when he returned. Finally, on a cold morning, João decided it was time to return. He walked through the streets of the city with his heart racing, trying to imagine what the bakery would be like. As he approached the corner, where so many times he had wondered whether or not to close the doors forever, he was met with an unexpected surprise. The small bakery, which had once been a forgotten place, was now full of life. The facade, once faded and unappealing, had been cleaned, and the display window showed fresh golden loaves of bread perfectly arranged on the shelves. There was a small line of customers at the door, something he hadn't seen in months. João stopped for a moment, both confused and amazed by the scene before him. When he finally stepped inside, he was greeted by the wonderful smell of fresh bread. Maria was behind the counter, smiling, while her children ran around helping the customers with an energy and joy that was contagious. She didn't notice him at first, busy with the orders, but the sight of the transformed bakery left him speechless. João stood there for a few minutes, watching everything. The customers seemed satisfied, with some praising the bread enthusiastically. "These are the best loaves I've ever tasted," exclaimed an elderly woman as she left with a bag full of bread. João's heart swelled with emotion. This was the kind of scene he had always dreamed of, but had never managed to create. Finally, Maria saw him. Her eyes widened in surprise and she rushed over to him, still a bit out of breath from the busy pace of the day. "João, "You're back," she said, visibly emotional. João, still at a loss for words, nodded slowly. I didn't expect to find the bakery like this. What you've done here is incredible, Maria. She smiled, visibly relieved by João's words. I just followed what you said, used the bakery, and did what I knew how to do. My grandmother's recipe is what brought people back, and with the money coming in, I managed to keep things running. I didn't want to let you down. João remained silent for a moment, taking everything in. He couldn't believe that this woman, who not long ago had been living on the streets, had transformed his bakery into a success. You didn't disappoint me, he finally said. You've done more than I could have ever imagined. Maria smiled, feeling immense relief. João knew that this was his chance to start over, not just as the owner of the bakery, but as a partner to someone who, like him, loved the place. I want you to stay here, with me, João said, finally feeling that the future of the bakery was in the right hands. João was still absorbing the transformation his bakery had undergone. The once desolate and lifeless space was now vibrant, full of energy and satisfied customers. He watched as Maria served people warmly, and her children helped with quick, cheerful movements. It felt like something out of a dream he had never been able to make real on his own. The bakery, which he had almost given up on, was now flourishing before his eyes. After a brief chat with Maria and more time observing, João asked her to sit with him at one of the tables after the morning rush. He needed to understand how it all had happened, and more importantly, make a decision about the future. Maria, still a little nervous, accepted and sat next to him, leaving her children in charge of the counter for a few minutes. Maria, I'm impressed. I've never seen the bakery like this, not even in its best days, João said, a mix of surprise and gratitude in his voice. How did you manage to do all of this in such a short time? Maria smiled shyly. It wasn't easy at first, João. I only had the little bit of money you left in the cash register, and all I knew how to make were my grandmother's breads. But I wanted it to work. I wanted my kids to have a better life, and this bakery became our only chance. She explained how she started making her grandmother's simple breads, ones that carried the taste of tradition and comfort. Slowly, people began to notice and return. She used the money from sales to buy more ingredients, expand the menu a bit, and ensure the shelves were always full. I never thought I could achieve all this, she said. But people started talking about the flavor of the bread, and soon there were more customers than I had ever imagined. João nodded, still processing the impact that Maria's family tradition had brought to the bakery. You brought something special to this place, something I couldn't bring on my own. The two sat in silence for a few moments until João finally said what had been on his mind since he returned. Maria, I've been thinking, I want you to stay, not as someone just using the space, but as my partner. This bakery has only come this far because of you, and it would be foolish to try to go on without your help. Maria looked at him, surprised. You want me to work with you, as your partner? Yes, João responded firmly. You've shown that this bakery has a future, something I almost gave up believing in. Together we can take it even further. It's not fair for all you've built here to just be a temporary phase. Maria's face lit up with the proposal. She had never expected her dedication to be recognized in such a way, especially by someone who had given her an opportunity without expecting anything in return. I don't know what to say, she said, emotional. You don't have to say anything now, João said, smiling. Just think about it. I just know that together, we can make this bakery something much bigger than I ever dreamed of. Maria smiled in response. She knew this was her chance to change her children's lives for good and to repay the trust João had placed in her from the beginning. And so, a new partnership began to take shape. Maria was no longer alone on that journey, and João, who had once thought of giving up, now saw a promising future alongside someone who, like him, believed in the transformative power of a simple loaf of bread. With the new partnership between João and Maria, the bakery grew even stronger. What had once been on the brink of closure became a symbol of renewal and hope in the community. Together, João and Maria found the perfect balance. He with his years of experience, and she with the passion and special touch from her grandmother's recipe, turned the bakery into a true success. Customers, once scarce, now crowded the doors every day. People came from far and wide to try the famous homemade bread, with many saying they had never tasted anything like it. The bakery's name began to spread to other neighborhoods, and soon even tourists were stopping by, curious to discover the secret of this small establishment that won everyone over with its flavors. Maria, who once lived on the streets with her children, now had a purpose and a new life. Her children were growing up happy, helping at the bakery and studying with more enthusiasm, knowing they had a bright future ahead. For her, seeing their smiles as they ran around the counter was the greatest victory. The bakery wasn't just a business, it was a home, a refuge, and proof that life could surprise you when you least expected it. João, for his part, felt rejuvenated. The weight of uncertainty that had been following him was gone. He not only regained his love for the bakery, but he also found a true partner in Maria. Together, they began to expand the menu, creating new recipes while always preserving the essence that had made the bakery successful. Maria's grandmother's bread, with its warm and homely flavor. In time, João and Maria became seen as examples of perseverance and collaboration. The story of the woman who transformed a struggling bakery into a success alongside its former owner began to inspire other local merchants. The bakery became more than just a place to buy bread. It was a community hub. Everyone wanted to be part of this story of triumph. And so, the bakery that had once almost closed its doors became a reference point, not only for the taste of its bread, but for the message it carried. For João, the biggest lesson was realizing that sometimes what we need is a new perspective. And for Maria, life had shown her that with hard work and faith, even the darkest days could be turned into light. The bakery's future was now bright. New plans were emerging, such as opening a second location or expanding production, but always keeping the authenticity that had brought success from the start. João and Maria knew that what they had built was more than just a business. It was proof that, together, they could overcome any challenge. And so, with the bakery doors wide open, the aroma of fresh bread continued to fill the streets, inviting everyone to share in the fruits of an unexpected partnership that transformed lives and brought a new beginning.